study. It has, excuse me, we did it with a classroom teacher named Andrea Shea, and it's just been, the full paper's just been published in the Journal of Education. So if you want to, we did it in a second grade classroom. We did it in a second grade classroom, and it was a year-long study, and there were 23 children involved. The school was a middle-class suburban school. Most of the children had some home support for using computers, but they hadn't really, their parents were using them, but they hadn't really been involved in it. The teacher was real interesting because she was trying to really involve her children in writer's workshop and have them understand writing, and what she was finding was problems that many of us still have, having a sense of audience. Her children didn't have a sense of audience, and so when they would be writing, you know how that goes. If you're not really focused, you don't give enough information, you give too much information. And also with second graders, she was trying to move them beyond themselves so that they could think beyond the information that they knew, but not sharing it with an audience. So the goal of the study was, could she, through introducing her children to blogging and with our assistance, help her children to have a sense of audience and move beyond just what they were thinking about themselves, so decenter in their writing. The way that she taught it was, DeVere and I suggested to her that she should model this, and we used pretty much a gradual release of responsibility model where she modeled for them how she blogs and her reason for blogging. And so she talked them through this, and she did this many times with them, and they practiced. And what this is an example of her doing it. And so she would say, "This is what I write on the paper." So first she would write on a paper for them, because since her children, of course, weren't very good at keyboarding, she was going to do the inputting of the information. But she wanted them to see that what they were going to say on the paper, this was their narrative. She was doing a personal narrative, so she would think out loud, do a think aloud for them about what it was she was going to write. She wrote it on paper, and then she typed it on a blog. And so she, I don't know if you can see this, but over here it was, here I write it, here I type it. You can hold it on your hand and take it to be read anywhere. It's on the computer, it's on the internet. So she was really trying to show them the difference between carrying it around in a paper and putting it on the internet. And so that's what she goes down here. It's no button pushing. Over here you have to do input, you have to look at quality, you have to put the writing in a specific place so that it can be found. It's a little bit harder because you have to type it. There's special effects. And so as she would be inputting it, she would be talking them through this so that they were learning the whole system of it. So what we're going to do now is show you a little bit of the pre and post data, and then we're going to, we chose 3 children to give you a little overview of how they looked at the end.
Yeah, just a very simple pre and post design with an indicator in the middle. There were 3 pieces that were posted on the blog during this particular unit. We also have some comparative data in our first paper that talks about how she compared the students' written products with paper, pen, and pencil against the work that was done on the blogs. But here we'll just focus on the blog piece. So there were 3 pieces that were there. Initially, she wanted to know, would students change things, vocabulary, and she conflated vocabulary, spelling, and so forth, because 2nd grade, 7th, and 8th graders are going to have a little difficult time separating out what's the difference between spelling, working on ideas, and so forth, into this question. And then, as you can see, it started out in this direction, that the students did want to make some changes in their paper right initially. In the second paper, it went down a little bit, and we hypothesized that the reason is that the topic was not as appealing to the students as it was in the first paper. But by the end of the unit, all of the students had started to realize, they started to decenter it and realize, when I have a message to convey, I've got to convey it in such a way, not just that I understand it for myself as a writer, as a composer, but also that those people who are going to read it are going to make some sense out of it. So you can see almost all of the students, 93% of the students, decided that, yeah, it does make a difference, and I will change my writing if I know that I get some feedback and I can make some revisions and changes to it in that direction. Then she asked, the students in the survey, what was your purpose in writing the piece? And we wanted to know, was it because I had to? The teacher assigned it, so I better do this. Is it because I wanted to write for myself, and I just had kind of myself as an audience in mind and wanted to write for my own purposes? Or do I want others to understand what I'm trying to say? This one was really dramatic, and you can see the change here. For the most part, for others, the target of the audience, writing for the audience, was very small at first. Mostly they were writing just for, because they were required to, because the teacher said, do it. But then it started to grow, and again, by the end, 79% said, yeah, I need to write because others are going to read this, and I want to convey my message, not just because I've been told to, or because I take some pleasure or intellectual excitement from having composed this piece, but also because others are going to read it, and I want to convey my message as effectively as I possibly can. Then, in the final question on the survey, we wanted to know if they preferred to write just for themselves or for an audience. And this, the change was a little bit different, but at first, yeah, we want to write for the audience. 64%, it varied just a little bit to 57, but by the end of the unit it was 79, so they had started to begin to think of themselves as writing for others as well as for themselves in the survey across the three pieces. This, did you want to talk about this piece?
Oh.
Or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
The way she collected, and this might be something that's of interest to you, she had the students compose the pieces, but then the teacher typed them in. She was the typist because second grade fingers are not as fast. Mine are fast, but not always as accurate. The students composed the pieces, and then she typed them in. In order to gather the comments, you know, in a blog you have a post, and then others can comment on that. In order to comment, in order to get things done as quickly as possible, what she did was have students write their comments on Post-it notes. I'm old enough to remember teaching before Post-it notes were used in schools. I don't know how we did it, but we did. They're just a valuable tool. She also gathered other information. Here she was asking, how did you like the blog? What did you learn from the blogging unit? And you can see some of the students' responses. I think it's worth the time to blog because you get comments, and the comments help you, for example. Blogs help your ideas come out, which is where we took our title, which is why we put this slide up. And then she would take these. After she would project, using a data projector like this one, she would take the students' blog posts and then their comments and project these up on the screen at first, and then later they came back to just reading at home and reading in class on the classroom computers, in addition to starting with the projector, and Diane will explain that to you.
And as you can see from the data, there was really growth in all of the children, but we chose just 3 different children to tell you a little bit about. So Maxine, Alexander, and Cameron. Maxine was real interesting because she was learning English as an additive language, and she was at a real interesting stage of her development because she was much more fluent in oral production than she was in written production, as you'll see. So she was reading at grade level. She was a very willing writer. In her writing, she was having some troubles with phrasing, syntax, and punctuation. She loved the posting. This was real interesting because the teacher right here changed the way that she was doing the instruction. Because as DeVere said, she was inputting it, but then she was asking each child, and she was putting in just what they wrote, but then she was asking each child to read it. And when Maxine read it, as I said, Maxine was a much more fluent oral language speaker, so she read it the way that she intended it to be conveyed, not the way that it was written. And it was interesting because as the children listened, in their first postings, they didn't say very much about any of her mechanical miscues because she didn't present that as she was reading it to them. So the teacher said, I have to change the way that I'm doing this. So the 3 of us talked and we said, okay, from now on, what we will do is we will just have the children read what you're posting. So the oral part left. And so then Maxine started to get input from the other kids about, we're enjoying what you're saying, but maybe you should pay a little bit of attention to adding some details and edits. And then this is a quote from her after that change happened. She said, I would like to focus on Hallie's, the teacher called them pushes and praises. So if it was offering a suggestion, it was a push, and if you were getting an applause, it was called a praise. So she said, I would like to focus on Hallie's push because I would like to include more details and edits. And so that change in the instructional design really supported both the writer and the children who were giving the edits. So that's Maxine. Next we have Alexander. Alexander, very proficient, very shy. I sort of like to write for myself because I know what I'm writing about, but it might be weird to other people. So he was real scared to have the teacher post anything. He was willing, though, to go on and offer all kinds of supports to the other children. So as he saw how much the other children really liked the posts that were coming, he decided he would do it. Even though he liked author's chair a lot, he liked to present, he did like the oral feedback from them. But gradually he started to be able to have his writing posted also, and he liked what they were saying. So after lots of comments from his peers, and they were always bragging about what a good writer he was, he said, I like to get feedback in class and by blogging. And this was a big breakthrough when he said this because he had been so scared. So that's a look at him. And then Cameron is our last child. And Cameron was a struggling reader. He was a very resistant writer. He had limited sense of audience. And by the time he had worked on this was his comment. Blogging helps your ideas come out. So he saw it as a support. It was that sense of audience. They knew who they were writing to. This was one of the comments that we also liked in his little post. That today was like the best day ever because I lost a tooth and I had my blog posted. Because she was posting 3 a day so that they could have time to really look at them and think about them.
She was a little afraid that if all the students write and they post all 23 at once, there would be this flood of information. The students would be overwhelmed with the amount. So they did a random, she used popsicle sticks, to draw out the first three. I remember that the first student was just thrilled that she was number 1. She was the first one to have her blog entry on the
We were sorry she couldn't get a day off to come here. She is on the paper in the Journal of Ed. So anyhow, all of the children, they loved it. It's continuing. And now what's happened at her school is because her children liked it so much, and they now, really view themselves as a community of writers and bloggers. Other teachers in the school have asked her to show them how to do it. So it's been a real successful project.
The blogging helped with a multiplier effect, where we could write, they did actually write these with paper and pencil. And we could have asked the students to just hand those around in a traditional small group setting, a peer editing, a peer response group, and we're all familiar with that. Teachers are familiar with that. What blogs allowed the students to do was to multiply that across the entire classroom and work consistently at it, and work also on the types of pushes and praises, the types of feedback that would be helpful and useful. With the pushes that needed to be suggestive rather than kind of a command, like this is what's wrong with your paper, rather she taught the students to be suggestive about what would help me understand your message better is if you work on adding the details. It was Alexander who was writing, whoops, sorry about that. It was Alexander who was writing about a game that he had. And in his game, he knew exactly what all the different levels were, but he didn't explain them. So those students who didn't know the game didn't know what he was talking about. And in this blogging exercise, the multiplier effect for the other students was that they saw that their details needed to be explained. What's implicit to the writer may not be explicit to the audience and to the readers of those papers.
And one additional piece that we're just now starting to look at, she had invited the parents to be interlopers, not to write anything, but from their home computer to be able to take a look into the classroom blogs to see the writing that their children were doing. So it really, the community of the classroom really expanded into the homes because the parents were able to take a look at the writing that their children were doing, and they felt so positive about that too.
It was a lockdown community, by the way. It was not available to the whole World Wide Web. Just parents, just the class. That was it, as far as the blogs were concerned.